Hey everybody, it's super crappy today because, it's Halloween, but also we're talking about French absolutism. Alright, anyway, this is me, Mr. Oliver. This is for my kids over at Bullard High School, but really, it's for anybody. You want to talk about history, and who doesn't? This is for you. Alright, so in order to talk about absolutism, first we got to define. Absolutism. What is absolutism? Well, let me tell you. Absolute, as in absolute control. Now, absolute monarchies are monarchies, one person in charge, a king, of course, that kind of build on what the new monarchs were doing and go even further with it. And they really try to get even more control over their people. McKay, if you have the McKay book, it does talk about how, well, yeah, there was a lot of control, but the king still had limits on his power. He still had to work with the nobles. You know, he could try to work around that, but he's still going to have to do it. But problems, he figures out a way. He's got 99 problems, but a noble ain't one, if you know what I mean, and I think you do. Anyway, let's go back to Henry IV. Now, Henry IV, you might remember him as being Henry of Navarre. He was the dude that won the War of the Three Henrys. He was the one who said, Paris is worth a mass. He is the one that was a politique. In other words, he was willing to make compromises on religion to avoid a larger conflict. A little bit like Elizabeth over in England. They were both politiques. Anyway, as you recall, in 1598 he had passed the Edict of Nantes. And the Edict of Nantes gave Huguenots... Who are Huguenots? Do you remember? That's right. They're French Calvinists. You did good. Now, if you didn't really get it right now, don't give yourself a treat. But if you did, you go ahead and pause this, and you go ahead and get a treat right now. Not like a dog. You're not like a dog. I'm not saying that. But I'm saying like, you know, a yogurt or something healthy like a grape. Good job. Anyway, so the Edict of Nantes is a thing that gives Protestants the right to have walled cities, that they can practice freely and do their own thing. They don't have to pay taxes to the Catholics, nothing like that. Henry IV goes even further than that, though. He also lowers taxes on the peasantry, and is generally thought of as a pretty good dude. There he is right there. Let me pause so you can see him. There he is. Doesn't he look nice? He's a kindly older man here. He once said, "If God spares me, that I will ensure that there is no working man in my kingdom who does not have the means to have a chicken in the pot every Sunday." Basically, he's saying, look, I actually care about my people. I am not just one of these dudes that's like me, 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 me. I want the common man, the working man. The working man. Chicken in the pot for the working man. That's what he wants, all right? So he's like, yo, guys, I want to make sure you have meat at least once a week. In other words, you're not just only living off of bread, which, of course, is the primary foodstuff at this time period for most people. He also goes even further. Look at this stuff. He encourages building projects, promotes forest growth. Forest growth? Mr. Oliver, that's like environmental. I know, right? I didn't mean to sound so creepy on that. I know, right? Oh, okay, that sounded creepier. But you know what? It's okay. You know why? Because it's Halloween. I don't know if it's still recording. It is. Okay. Anyway, sorry for creeping you out, kids, but that's what we do here in Shocktober. Anyway, like all good leaders, he's murdered. This is going to be a thing that you need to recognize in history. If there is a leader that is doing good things for his people, that is trying to change the dynamic a little bit, make it just a little better for people, somebody's going to be like, this guy's changing too much, we need to murder him. Sure enough, he is murdered in 1610. Dog. If you haven't listened to my other lectures, I like to point out when people randomly insert dogs into historical pictures or paintings, in this case a drawing. This is Henry VIII being assassinated. There's the assassin there, right here, getting all stabby. He's like, uh-oh. He's like, ding. I might argue that the dog is more prominent than the assassin in this particular picture. Anyway, he's killed by a Catholic, kind of epitomizing the whole Catholics and Protestants don't really get along. Still. Then comes his son. Now, his son is too young to reign on his own. He's only 9 years old. So he has what's called a regency, which is somebody else kind of ruling on his behalf. In this case, it is his mum, and that is Marie de Medici. Mr. Oliver, ain't that sort of a person I've heard of before? It's, I believe that's someone who I've heard of. Yeah, the Medicis. Okay, just calm down. Calm down. She puts this other dude named Cardinal Richelieu, she appoints him head minister, and this guy is like the MVP, most valuable priest of France. This guy is going to be a real killer. But first, here's Marie. You go, Mr. Oliver, she's a bit pleasantly plump. Okay, number one, just calm down, okay? Because Americans are by and large a little overweight. Even me, I know it's hard to believe. But back then, being a little, as we'll talk about later, Rubenesque, is actually considered to be a good thing. Think about it. The average peasant couldn't afford food. Not much, not the good stuff. It was hard to get food. Therefore, what does society do? It says, hey, you know what? Beauty standards are, you need to be kind of big. Now it's 2015 when I'm recording this. Food is abundant. You can go anywhere, value menus, even at fast food places, which were already cheap. And what's the female body ideal? Pleasantly plump? I think not. It is to be anorexically thin. Fight the patriarchy, ladies. And boys, don't be a part of it. All right, anyway, so Louis XIII is right here, and stylishly dressed, I might add. That he is there. Now, obviously, Marie is the regent, technically. It's because 9-year-olds, you don't want a 9-year-old in charge. I got a 9-year-old at my house. He is, oh God, he's not. He's 11 now. My goodness, I'm getting old. Anyway, here is Richelieu right here. And Richelieu had goals. One king, one law, one faith. In other words, I'm going to make sure that my king, this is Richelieu talking, not Mr. Oliver, that my king, who is Louis XIII, has no competitors, nobody competing with him for power. There will be one law, and that will be the king's law. And how can we be united if we don't have one faith? Problematic. Now, Richelieu, you think like, wait a second, this guy, is he like power hungry? Yes, but in kind of an interesting way. He truly is interested in gaining power for the sovereign, for the king, in a way that does not enrich himself. He's plenty powerful. He's happy making his king even more powerful. So one of the reasons that we will talk a lot about Richelieu in this chapter, but if you read the book, you're not going to see as much directly about Louis XIII. It's because if you've got people who are working on your behalf, doing a killer job, why do you want to tell them to stop so that you can be bossy? Okay? Just do your thing. Okay? You be you. Treat yourself. Richelieu divides France up into 32 districts ruled by intendants. Why? Okay, pull back for a second. Remember the new monarchs. The new monarchs were trying to minimize the power of the nobles. The nobles had traditionally been the source of all power on their land. Now, Richelieu is dividing France up into districts. It's officially, like you think of it now like, oh, okay, we have counties all over the United States. Is it hard for one person to gain a ton of power in one county? Yeah, harder than it would have been at least in the old way. And they have 32 districts, so there's a whole bunch of them. And what's more, they're people who are in charge of these counties or these districts. The generalities is the technical term. Those people are generally from the middle class, and they are appointed by the crown or by Richelieu acting on the king's behalf. So, are they loyal to local nobles? Nope. Are they going to put up with local nobles telling them what to do? No, they're reporting higher. And even more genius, they're rotated out every couple of years so that if an intendant is there for too long, it's like, we need to move that guy. Move him to a different place. That way, he can't be bribed as easily. He doesn't get in with the local populace as much and start getting greedy. Now he has to start all over again in a different place. Clever, Richelieu. What about the Huguenots? Well, remember how I'd said with the Edict of Nantes that the Huguenots got to have walled cities? Richelieu literally leads an attack on La Rochelle, probably the most famous of all of the Huguenot walled cities. And they take it down. It's called a siege because that's what you call when you're attacking a city, trying to bring them down. The siege of La Rochelle is a famous thing. Now, wait a second, Mr. Oliver. Does that mean that Edict of Nantes is dead? Is it gone? Not yet. Richelieu and Louis the 13th, weakens it. It's going to be his successor, Louis the 14th, who really just puts a nail in the coffin and kills it. What did Rishi want to do? What's Rishi want to do? Richelieu. Boop, bloop, doop. Destroy the Habsburgs. Sorry, I was just feeling my flow just then and decided to rap. Anyway, he wants to weaken the power of the Habsburgs. You might recall, we talked about this a little bit in the last unit. That was the Habsburg-Valois Wars had been going on before Richelieu even came along. But then, here comes Ferdinand II, some Catholics are getting thrown out windows over in Bohemia, and he's sending in armies. So Richelieu's like, if the Catholics win in Germany, they might reassert their power a little bit. We need to keep them weak. We need to keep Central Europe up for grabs, or at least out of the control of the Habsburgs, out of the Austrian Empire. Therefore, we'll send troops over to help them, or money, or whatevs. This is a thing we've already talked about. It is anybody know? I gave you a big hint when I said people got tossed out a window, or defenestrated. 30 Years' War, you were right. If you were right, go get yourself a grape or a yogurt. Probably not too much yogurt, probably not good for you to eat too much dairy. I'm thinking probably some strawberries or whatever is in season at the time you're watching this. Might be blueberries, might be zucchini. I don't know. I don't know your life. Okay? I don't pretend to. But if you got that wrong, you're not allowed to. Richelieu relies on the thinking that what's done for the state is done for God. He is identifying the king with God. He's not saying the king is a god, but he's using this divine right kind of thing, this idea that the king is put into power by God, and therefore you should respect him if you're a good Christian. If you don't respect the king, not only are you getting in trouble on earth, you're also going to hell. It's very clever for controlling people. This is the divine right of kings theory. You're going to see it a lot during the 17th century. By the 18th century, it's kind of falling out of fashion, at least with non-kings. Kings still like it. Louis XVI will still try to be all like this, but then the French Revolution happens and they're all like, no. After Louis XIII dies, there is a popular rebellion against the government. Basically, what you need to know is that Henry IV, remember that dude, the old kind of kindly looking man? He had not called Parliament. He stopped calling Parliament. Now in France, just to be confusing, they don't call it Parliament. They call their courts the parliaments with an E instead of a AI. Their Congress or legislative branch is called the Estates General. He doesn't call them. And yet, for most of his reign, and then all the way through Louis XIII's reign, they still don't consult the nobles about decisions. So there are people in the nobility who are all like, we're upset about this. We're upset because Louis XIII was kind of stealth raising taxes on us without getting our approval to do that. Everybody knows it shouldn't be us who are paying more taxes. It should be the poor people. Well, that's what they were arguing at least. So there was a rebellion against the governments by the aristocrats after Richelieu died. And they try basically to not necessarily overthrow the government, but they try to incite rebellion amongst the lower classes, cause trouble for the new king, a 5-year-old named Louis XIV. Louis XIV, the story goes, is in his bedroom chilling, and then all of a sudden a bunch of crazies bust in while he's in his little bedroom being 5 years old, being all scared, and he's all like, "Argh!" And he's traumatized. And the story goes that he decided at that young age that he was going to spend his whole life learning to control the people, because otherwise the result would be chaos. And it's probably not, I mean, the part about them busting into his bedroom is probably true, but the part about him like deciding at the age of 5 to become more controlling and more absolutist is a bit much. It probably was invented later on. There he is there. Beautiful young man. 5 years old, traumatized by the Fronde, long flowing locks. He considered himself the Sun King. Now, the Sun, this is not actually why he was called the Sun King. Just to, in case somebody's watching this going like, actually, Mr. Oliver, that's not correct. It's because when I have a slide in a minute, when he was a young person, he appeared in a production, he actually did ballet, where he was Apollo, the sun god, and he afterwards was known as the Sun King. But I find it's useful for students just to identify him with the sun. You know, the sun. Okay? And you go like, well, why is that? Was he a ball of gas? No, I'm not implying that. That's really weird. Why would you assume that? But he, without him, there was no life. He gave everything to the people of France. That's at least the kind of way he likes to portray himself, as being the giver of favors. And without the sun, what happens? You wilt away. So without his favor, what's going to happen? You'll die. All right? Supposedly, he once said, I don't actually speak French, so I'm going to mess this up. L'État, c'est moi. I am the state. In other words, France is nothing without me. I am France. Which is a pretty dope thing to say, quite frankly. This right here is his favorite portrait of himself, by the way. Why not? If I had legs like that, I would be all like, yes, paint that. Put it in every room. This is another painting of him. He is accompanied by an angel. The circle is my doing, not the actual original painting. But it shows that God is on his side, like literally, and he is always accompanied by a representative of God. Therefore, you should obey because God's on his side. God put him in power, blah, blah, blah. If you actually ever get the chance to go to the palace of Louis XIV, which we'll talk about in a minute, it's called Versailles. It is gorgeous, and you need to go there. And if you see it, you'll see there are sun images all over the place. Suns everywhere. Because, get it? He's the Sun King. He's not subtle, this guy. There he is. It's when he was a kid, being all Apollo-y. Who puts this stuff in here? I'm sorry, everyone. I'm sorry. So Louis took what his his predecessor, Louis XIII, had built, which was this hunting lodge, and says, look, here's what we need to do. We need to move the royal court away from Paris. We're too accessible. I need to make access to me be something that I can move into this controls type thing, where access to me equals power for you, but it secretly means power for me. And so he moves the royal court about 15 miles east of Paris to a place called Versailles. And Versailles is no longer just a little hunting lodge. He builds the fanciest, swagalicious palace in all of Europe. And I mean, just look at it. It's swaggy. Look at it right there. Oh, hey, look, people are coming. He's greeting you. Look at all the people. Look at all the people. Oh, swag, swag, swag. What's that? Watch this. I'm going to say something really smart. Ready? Louis XIV, not content to simply control the humans of France, takes it upon himself to make even nature bend to his will. Mic drop, because that was brilliant. But it's true. He was really into manicured gardens. He makes everything look perfect all the time. A huge squad of gardeners. Although there's a story that says he's got all these fountains. He's really into fountains. But supposedly the fountains didn't all work. So Louis had this gimmick where he would have people follow him around. Or he didn't know about it, but I mean the gardeners had this gimmick where Louis would be strolling the gardens, and the gardeners would see he was coming, so they would turn off the pressure to a previous fountain that he'd already passed, so that there was enough power or pressure or whatever. I'm not a water scientist, a hydrologist or whatever, to enough pressure to make the next one go. So they kind of were doing this constantly to make sure, doing this balancing act, to make sure it appeared all of them were working while they actually weren't. Clever. This is the Hall of Mirrors at Versailles, and this is one of the best examples of how ornate it was. Now, if you were about to say, you know what, this palace is quite Baroque, Mr. Oliver. It's very ornate and fancy to the point of like making people feel small and stuff like that. You know what I would say to that? Bingo. Because it is a Baroque palace. Footnote, I've thrown up in this room. All right, 2, 1. All right, this is the king's bedroom, and you have here a very fancy, ornate stuff. What's all that yellow up there? What's that color supposed to be? That's gold. Yeah, oh, that's the color. No, it's actually gold. What? Okay, you get the point. Lots of gold. Very fancy. Mr. Oliver, are you implying the king and queen had separate bedrooms? Yeah, because the king had mistresses, because France, and so you had to hey, I can't share a room with you, girl. I gotta have my privacy on. Now, does he have a secret passage to his queen's, his lady, my lady? Does he have a secret passage to the queen's bedroom? Yeah, obviously. But he's also got in here, he's got all his swag. He's got his own thing happening. Nowadays, this wasn't here probably when he was there. He would have tripped over it. Nowadays, when you go to Versailles, they don't want you to climb onto Louis XIV's bed. So they have like a little guard railing. You can sit there. All the kids are like, I'm going to sit here and lean. And all the security guards are like, no, you're not. This, by contrast, is Philip II's bed. Philip had a much simpler life than Louis, who designs his palace, as I think I already said, in the Baroque style. Philip, much more simple, humble man. Louis did not know the meaning of the word humble. Here's what Louis saw every night as he went to bed. This is what it was on his ceiling. I actually took this picture in Versailles before I got sick, and it is gods and goddesses, and he is in there, of course, representing the sun. I managed, because I am terrible at taking pictures, to somehow miss the central focus of the picture, which is Louis, it's up here, being the sun. Anyway, gardens at Versailles, if you can go there, do it. It's really beautiful. It's a little overpriced, perhaps, but as far as like, hey, I went and saw the swaggiest place on earth, go there. It's really, really cool. Fountains. It's great. Fountains. What can you say? Who's that handsome fella right there? Why, that's me. Circa 2012, I believe. And that's me about, let's see, I think it's about 30 minutes before I got sick in the Hall of Mirrors. By the way, kids, if you're feeling nauseous, don't drink Coke. Not a good idea. Now, the whole idea of Versailles is not only to look swaggy, as I have previously said. It's a way to control the nobles, because remember, he's still reliant on the nobles because they have land and blah, blah, blah. So what he does is he limits access to himself and makes it so the nobles basically have to go to him. Many of them actually move, at least the high-ranking ones, move to Versailles. And so it goes from being this tiny little hunting lodge to this fancy palace, and you got everybody and their uncle, who's anybody, like all the top members of society, all hanging out. And apparently it's quite crowded. It's just everybody's there. And then the people who get to hang out with the king, those are the greatest people of all. Those are the people that he's like, that's right. And like, if he just looks at you and says something, like, that's a super, super duper honor. Supposedly, it was even an honor to carry his chamber pot. What's that, a chamber pot? Yeah, a chamber pot. The place he held his poop and pee when it was nighttime. And he's all like, yo, I gotta get my poop on. Like, just like being the servant that took that out. Fancy. The king can't go to an outhouse. Even during the day, he's like, I got business. Royal business. And then he poops. And then supposedly, as the servant is taking this proud servant is like, I am holding the king's dung, and people are supposedly bowing to it. Nobles were expected to bow to the poop. You had to bow to the king's food as it was presented to him. Therefore, it made sense. You also had to bow to the royal chamber pot. Being the guy that got to sit next to Louis, being someone who went on a hunt with him, that was the bomb.com. So, Louis plays little games with people. He's really into acquiring gossip. Louis, just stop it. He's always acquiring gossip on people, secretly opening their letters, spying on them, finding out who's getting with who, if you know what I mean, and I think you do, so that he can kind of start playing people against each other. Because that way, the nobles, and think about this, this is quite brilliant, they go from being an actual political force to being people who are more worried about social status than actual political power. He's very, very clever. What about Louis's aspects of religion? Louis himself is actually a fairly tolerant dude, but he thinks Richelieu was right. Richelieu's not still around. He's dead. I don't know when he died. He died in some year. I'm not going to look it up right now because I'm not in the mood.
Drama bomb.
Sorry, my wife texted me. That's her ringtone. If you could hear it. If you couldn't even hear it, don't worry about it. Anyway, he revokes the Edict of Nantes in 1685, and many Huguenots end up getting arrested. Some leave the country. Some go to the Netherlands. Some go to the German countries. Remember, at this time, Germany is not really one country. It's like 300 different little countries. They go all over. So the Edict of Nantes is a way of having religious conformity, much like what Richelieu wanted. One king, one law, one faith. Those are good watchwords if you are a noble. Louis needs a way to earn money because he is always building fancy, swaggy things. Versailles, remember all those gardens? Those aren't cheap. What about them fountains? They ain't cheap. So he says, look, also I'm going to spend a lot of money going to war with minimal success. And his finance minister is like, oh, okay. He's like, listen, I'm going to need some more money. He's like, oh, okay. How about if I come up with a fancy new system called mercantilism? What? What's mercantilism? I'll tell you. It's an economic policy where all economic activity is aimed at making the national economy strong and the government wealthier. In other words, you're trying to acquire as much gold as possible, it's money basically back then, for the king, for the crown. You are going to focus on everybody giving you money. Now, if you're importing a lot of goods, if you're bringing in a lot of goods from outside your country, are you making money on that? No, somebody else is making money off you. Unacceptable. So, you need to be as self-sufficient as possible. You need to make as much of your own stuff as possible so that you're trading quite a bit out. It's exports. You're selling things to other people whilst importing as a small amount as possible, with the ultimate goal being complete self-sufficiency, although nobody ever gets there. This is wonderful for France. But imagine you are England, and France is like, hey guys, we're going to trade with you, but we don't want to trade with you a whole bunch of stuff from you. We just want to sell to you and not import very much. What do you think of that? And Britain's going to be like, it's going to have two different reactions. They're going to be like, number one, no, that's not good for us. And number two, they'll be like, what a great idea. We should do that for ourselves. Now, remember the Age of Exploration? This dovetails very nicely with the Age of Exploration, because if you're setting up colonies on the other side of the world, you can start bringing in new products from there. Remember the triangular trade? And that triangular trade can give you kind of an advantage on people, where you can be like, well, now we're selling this new thing. We're going to make France even stronger. And what's more, we'll carry it on French ships, and we'll grow it on French colonies. So who's getting all the money? France, France, France! That is one of the reasons you see a lot of European countries, especially mercantilistic ones, starting as many colonies as possible. Because then you can also sell things to the people living in your colonies and make it so you make even more money. There are trading companies. They're run and taxed by the Royal French government. Taxes on anything coming from outside. So you're like, oh, you know what? Actually, I don't want to buy French tobacco. I prefer English tobacco. Okay, number one, tobacco is wacko if you're a teen. But we won't talk about that right now, but stay off the drugs. But also, you could be like, oh, okay, well, French tobacco is like $40 a pound. I have no idea if that's accurate, by the way. I just totally made that up. English tobacco, let's see how much that is, because I prefer that. Oh, what? That's $100 a pound. Why is it so much? I'll tell you, brother. Tariffs. Taxes. He forces people to buy French stuff by making everything else more expensive. So that, who ends up with the money? France. I never explained this, by the way. Right there, this is Colbert, his finance minister. That's the gold going to the government. It was supposed to be a visual that helped you remember it. Like I said, they encourage colonization of America. The Americas, actually, but France is really famous for having tons of colonies in America. They really do until 1763, when the English overpower them in the 7 Years' War, or as it's known here in America, the French and Indian War. But they build a fleet of ships. That's the merchant marine. They encourage international trade. Everything is, all the taxes and stuff are going back to the French crown. It's a really good system as long as you are the one making money from it. The middle class, the upper class, they are not as crazy about it because they're not making as much money. A different system will appeal to them, and it will show up in the 1700s, around the mid to late 1700s actually. 1776 if you want to be proper, and that is capitalism. So a good summary statement would be that Colbert's mercantilistic policies gave Louis the funds, the money, to maintain absolute power. Because it's not cheap being Mr. Swagalicious. Mr. I'm going to go to war with everybody. Mr. I'm going to build everything that looks like it's made out of gold, because it is. So, good on you, Colbert. As far as wars go, Louis loved art and music. In fact, a lot of ballet positions were actually invented by him. A student told me that once. I don't know if it's true, and it's the history of ballet, which, no disrespect to ballet, it's just personally not my thing. So I'm just going to go ahead and believe that, because I don't want to look it up. He was really into war. He really fancied himself as this genius that would send his troops off and make France even more powerful. In reality, he loses a lot. He spends 2/3 of his reign at war. Just for context, he takes over in 1648 and rules until 1715, I believe. It's off the top of my head, but I think it's right. And that's expensive. And you go like, well, when you're winning, you can, make up a little money. No, he loses most of the time. He did have the first permanent professional army that was always ready to go, and he was happy to use it. This is another kind of characteristic of the absolute monarchs. We saw this first with the new monarchs. Remember, they were forming armies that were like a standing army. Now, Louis is saying like, no, we got this all day, every day. Where do you attack? He's attacking German territory, trying to take stuff away from the Habsburgs over in Austria, largely unsuccessful. Has to give some of it back. Gets involved in the War of Spanish Succession. Now, the War of Spanish Succession is an interesting one. Remember Spain? And sadly, that's the way it's going to be after 1588. It's going to be like periodically we just suddenly mention Spain again. It's like, hey, remember Spain? Remember how it used to be so awesome? Yeah, remember how the nut? All right, Charles II had died without a son. That's Charles II there. He is the last Habsburg ruler of Spain. He is a descendant of Philip II. This guy, though, no babies, kind of an unusual look. I tried to find a nice picture of him where he didn't look so freakish, because, let me put this nicely, the royal gene pool was a bit shallow. You know what I'm saying? A lot of inbreeding with cousins over a long period of time sometimes leads to problems. Anyway, he died without a son, and he named Louis XIV's grandson, Philip of Anjou, as his heir. Now, nobody thought this was a good plan except Louis, because everyone was like, wait a second, Spain is right next to France. Louis already goes to war all the time. If he had Spain's resources, he'd be unstoppable. I mean, just look at this map. France, if they unified with Spain, there would be big problems. So everyone's like, Louis, don't accept that will. And he's like, LOL, I just did. So everyone declares war on him. And he says, so all of Europe says, look, we're going to form a superpower team. It's going to be Austria. It's going to be Prussia. What's Prussia, Mr. Oliver? We haven't talked about that yet. That's not in the book yet. Yeah, it comes later. Basically, when you think Prussia, think the capital is Berlin. It's in Central Europe. It's the thing that is going to conquer everything else and make Germany. But right now, it's just baby Germany. So Austria, Prussia, the Dutch. Remember, late 17th century is like, whoa, Dutch are in, that's their golden age. And England, and they form the Grand Alliance, all pitting themselves against France and Spain. And France loses. So they divide things up. Now, wait a second, Mr. Oliver. Didn't Louis accept the will, and that's why everyone went to war with him? Yes. Because it sort of says that Spain does end up going to his grandson, and it's that same guy you already said, Philip of Anjou. Yes. But there's a special thing that says they're not allowed to unite with France. And the Spanish Netherlands, all of the Italian possessions that had once been part of Spain, end up going to the Habsburgs, the Holy Roman Emperor, over there in Austria. Britain takes over the lucrative, which is another way of saying very wealth-inducing, wealth-making Spanish slave trade called the Asiento. And we're going to stop there because that's all I got to say about that. Louis dies. His successors will not be as good. They will still try to be absolutists. We'll end up with more Louis. Louis XV, then Louis XVI. Then Louis XVI will lose a little bit off the top of his head. And it's going to be a little... So, basically, that's where we're stopping now. You have a nice day, and peace out.